Hello, good morning. Thank you for everyone to be here. This is going over the lunchtime. So it's my pleasure to invite Merve for the last talk of this session in the morning. She'll be talking about, as you can see already on the screen, about production-ready notebooks for Hugging Face. So please welcome Merve with a round of applause.
Thank you. So, title of my talk is Taking Notebooks to Production Using Hugging Face Hub, which is a bit tricky, and it might not be what you think it is, but just stick with me. About me, I work at Hugging Face, and I'm a natural language processing researcher, graduate researcher, and I occasionally talk in beautiful conferences like this. And I wanted to start with how Hugging Face was born at the first place, so that it makes sense. It has a bit of a story. So if you are doing machine learning, there is a new paradigm called transfer learning, and it's in fact not that new, but you have these big pre-trained models, and then you have your own data set, and then you do a process called fine-tuning, which is essentially taking this big model and using the parameters of this big model and not modifying it. And this way you can train better models with less data. And there is many examples of this, but biggest examples I would say are models like GPT-2. You use in computer vision, you have models like ResNet. You use these models as backbones, and then you end up with a better model for your use case with less data that would be required if you were to train a model from scratch. And the Transformers library was born this way. So the founders were essentially playing around with GPT-2 and other models for their own chatbots. And then they created these awesome abstractions in the meanwhile and started an open source repository to release it. And people were like, oh, this is so cool. Maybe you should turn this into a library. So they started this library called Transformers, which is currently I would say I think it's the second biggest machine learning repository by means of stars on GitHub right now. And because of this, so essentially what you need is these models, like big models from Google, from Facebook, from OpenAI, and then you need data sets. So Hugging Face Hub was born this way, a place to host models, datasets, and any other artifacts for machine learning, so that you can just grab this model and then grab your dataset and then fine-tune the model and then have a better model. And we also have dataset repositories like this. And these are not only for natural language processing, but we have many models and datasets in all modalities, which I will come today. And just hosting your model, using these, everything is for free and open source. So you don't need to pay for anything. Hugging Face at its core is an open source first company. So going back to the theme of this talk, let's say you trained a model in the notebook. So what is next? So there is this process is different for many people, but you need to clean your data, do feature engineering, version your data, and maybe version your pre-processing code. And then you do experimentation, and during experimentation, you do hyperparameter search. You version your model or your pipeline and see which pipeline is better. And then you deploy your model, you do monitoring. So there is various challenges, like for instance, if you would like to collaborate, there's a challenge of security because people are using Pickle. And there is a challenge of reproducibility, which like you might have conducted an experiment, but someone might not be able to reproduce your results because there is some missing information about the data versioning, the model, and stuff. And then collaborating, the version control and everything over models is not really optimized in many places. It's and because of this, we have Hugging Face Hub, and again, it's completely for free. Everyone can use it. So we have model repositories which are optimized for machine learning because, for instance, if you go to GitHub, it's optimized more for code, but in machine learning, you need to have different needs. For instance, like there is file size issue, there is the fact that you cannot see what the model does unless you download it on your local. But we address these issues in various ways. So in a model repository, you have the links to the data set that is used to train that model. You have this widget that is automatically enabled, that is used, that shows what the model is actually doing. You have this card called model card, which explains disclaimers. It might have hyperparameters of the model. It might have information about the architecture. And on top, you can see sort of like a metadata on the library that model was trained with, the serialization formats, the license of the model, and other stuff. And lastly, you have the applications built on that model. And also, if you click, so there is a button over there used in transforms. If you click, you will see how you can use this model on your local, because you do not have to try it over there, but we have many library integrations, which I will explain today, that lets you clone this model to your local, and there's tons of abstractions that makes that model ready to use, which is very cool in my opinion. And we have, as you can see here, we have model files, and over there you can see there is a drop-down called main. So this works just like any other version control. You might have multiple branches, which we call revisions, for different, for instance, hyperparameter search, different pipelines and more that you can version. And you have your commit history. You can open a pull request to that repository. And that's the previous model card that I have shown is actually a readme.md file that is rendered over there. And then we have a community tab in which you can open a discussion or a pull request. Like, for instance, this one is a pull request where someone adds the ONX version of that model. And lastly, for model repositories, we host TensorBoard instances if you want for experiment tracking. That is, if you push the TensorBoard logs to the repository. And we have it for many modalities, including reinforcement learning, audio, tabular, which I worked on adding, and object detection and more. And these are the widgets of those modalities. And then we also support like many libraries. And as for data versioning, you can programmatically version your data sets as well. We also have a client-side library called datasets, which lets you modify the dataset and push it to the hub. And over there, we have the dataset preview, models trained on that dataset, and the dataset card. And we also do malware scanning on the model repository, so you actually know what you're downloading, because you should never deserialize a pickle file on your local unless you trust the source of it. And we also do notebook rendering because it's an essential step where you, if you have a model, then people need to know about the pre-processing steps and more, and your pipeline, if they want to reproduce your results. You can also have a notebook in the repository, and it will be rendered. And another thing is we have a library called Hugging Face Hub, client-side library, which you can manage your repositories programmatically so that, for instance, when you are, for instance, you run many training runs, you can just add a couple of lines of code, and it will version your models programmatically every time. Just add it at the end of the script. For instance, you can create a remote repository on Hugging Face Hub, and then start Hugging Face API, and then call upload folder to create a push your model to the hub. And also, we have many library integrations, including scikit-learn, transformers, anything you name spacey, that lets you just download the model and have it ready to use. Like, for instance, for transformers, we have this pipeline abstraction. It just downloads the model ID that you give, which is one of the repositories, and you give the task that it solves. And then you just call the pipeline, and it will give you the score and the label of it. As for datasets, you can do the same thing. You have load dataset, the dataset repository, and also you can give the revision if you want to. And another thing, we have something called Spaces, which lets you host model demos. It supports Shiny, it supports Streamlit, Gradio, and more that I will come later on. But this is cool because you can demonstrate things to your customers. Like, for instance, I was a machine learning engineer back in the day, and they would let me create a, there was, I think Fast API was in early days, but like I had to create a demo for my machine learning model and serve it myself, create a Docker image for it and stuff. Like, I would hate that process. It wouldn't even look good. But this UI is created with very few lines of code using Gradio. You can also use Streamlit or Shiny if you want to. I was like, where was this when I was a machine learning engineer? And you can deploy it on Spaces, and it's completely for free. Like, you can just deploy your application and show it to the other people. And we have many Docker images for instance, Shiny, Label Studio, ZenML, Argilla, and Livebook is for Elixir. Like, it doesn't even need to be completely in Python. And for instance, this is the Docker image for JupyterLab. Like, you can run a JupyterLab instance inside a space if you want to, and keep a notebook and just let others play with it. And lastly, if you would like to deploy the models that you have pushed to Hugging Face Hub, we also got you on that side. There is two, I would say, biggest solutions we have. One of them is Optimum, which is used if you have like a model, a deep learning model, you would like to quantize it and make it optimal for specialized hardware or different runtimes like OpenVINO. You can use this. And also we have inference endpoints, which is essentially you give a model repository and you select your cloud provider, and it will deploy a container on that cloud provider, create an endpoint that you can send a request to, and that's it. Like, it makes it very easier to deploy very big models, which is a big challenge. This one, like, until this point, everything was free, but this one is obviously charged by your cloud provider. And lastly, this is my project called Tasks. If you would like to start deploying something like, if you do not have a background in machine learning yet, you have a project, you have an idea. Like, for instance, you would like your computer to create a code model that works with your voice and stuff. You can combine like multiple models, like automatic speech recognition and then a code model. You can use this project, so it essentially has a page for every single machine learning task. For instance, this one is for video classification. You have the definition of what the task does. You have a widget. For this one, there was none, obviously. And you have like example models, like the most used models. You have inference code, like a simple inference code. Because this task is an early task, it's not very mature at this point. It's not as good, but you have the simple explanation of metrics and stuff. So you can check it out if you want. And if you have any questions, I kind of finished a bit early for lunch. You can ask.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Merve. And we have plenty of questions time for questions.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about Hugging Face Hub. So we can have a version of Hugging Face Hub on-premise?
You can have a version of Hugging Face Hub on what?
On-premise.
On-premise. I think there was a project for that, but like I don't think so. Think of it like GitHub. So like you can just use it if you want to as an organization or like a user, individual user.
Did I saw hand there? No? No hand? No question? Any other question?
Thank you.
Repeat the question? Oh, yeah, sure.
Do you have some kind of like diff tool to compare between
Diff tool to compare
data sets or models between one another? Like two versions have different layers or different weights or something like that?
Good question. I think there is one for data sets, but for model files, if it's a binary file, I don't think so. But I think it would be a very cool idea to have a diff tool specifically made for models. I actually noted it down right now. I will just talk to the developers at Hugging Face Hub.
Any further question to Merve? Okay. Again, thank you, Merve, and
Thank
please
you.